More humiliating on his part was the attempt to pincer Vergas by the Bay of Diros, which had no warrior garrison. There, his soldiers were repulsed by a surprisingly fierce countercharge led by local elders and women, the latter of whom became honorifically known as the Amazons of Diros.
No, bro, no, boss. I mean, yo, this is boss. This is boss. That is awesome. You got women and old people repulsing a whole attack from a professional military. Boss. That is actually badass. I'm not gonna lie.
Throughout 1825, Ibrahim Pasha and his Egyptian cohorts had forcefully asserted themselves as the masters of the...
This series is so far one of my favorite series thus so far. I'm not even kidding. Not even kidding. Let me push this chair back. Not even kidding. This series is indeed really, really good for me.
Peloponnese, while the Hellenic Republic, recovering from their very ill-timed civil wars, consistently failed to put up an organized defense. But all was not lost for the freedom fighters of Hellas. In this third episode of the Greek War of Independence, Missolonghi will fall, and the natal Hellenic Republic will be beaten within an inch of its life. But their struggle will continue, and at their darkest moment, powerful allies, for better or worse, will come to their aid. It's the same deal with our sponsor for this video.
Sponsor? Oh, disgusting! No, it's not disgusting. It's not disgusting, but...
More champions immediately.
The type of sponsor.
Only a few strongholds remained in Hellenic hands, one of which would be the stage of the most iconic battle of the entire war. Twice had the town of Missolonghi repelled Ottoman siege attempts, the second time famously resulting in the martyrdom of Lord Gordon Byron, English Greekaboo Supreme. When Ibrahim Pasha's Egyptian regulars had landed in the south and began their fiery march through the Peloponnese, they had bypassed Missolonghi, seeing it as strategically insignificant compared to the fortresses at Methoni and Navarino. However, while Sultan Mahmud II was mostly content to let his autonomous Egyptian vassals spearhead this latest phase of the war effort, he would not have his own forces sit idly by on the sidelines. So it was that the Sublime Porte appointed one 45-year-old Kutahib Pasha as head of all Ottoman land forces in Rumelia, and told him in simple terms that either Missolonghi would fall or the head would from his shoulders. Thus,
you know what is funny to me is, again, I don't see like European empires doing this, right? Like, I don't see European empires executing their generals left, right, and center, decapitating them left, right, and center for losing battles. I genuinely cannot. Oh, let me word that better, because some people will take that too literally. I will point out like one cherry picked example. Be like, what about compared to the Turkic / Islamic world? I don't see. I never heard of Europeans like doing this type of stuff as much. I never really heard like, oh, you lost this battle, oh, gotta decapitate your head now. Oh, you feel to put down an uprising, oh, gonna slice your you know what I mean. Like, I only hear this whenever whenever it's like, I'm not trying to accuse anyone, but I just notice a pattern where it's always Islamic or Turkic, some type of Islamic empire or Turkic empire doing this. Like, I know in the Middle Ages, Europe, you know, always did that, like cut people's heads off and whatnot. But I'm talking like the modern, you know, early modern to modern period. Honestly speaking, compared to the Islamic world and the Turkic world. And this is going to enrage a lot of people what I'm about to say, but this is just something that I've noticed with watching and reacting to all of this by now. A lot of these European empires seemed less barbaric in terms of the way how they treat their officers, troops, like high-ranking officials. Like, I can't think of a story where a European general failed to do something and it resulted in him getting like decapitated, right? I can't. Usually they just get sacked and that's it. They get sacked, they lose their job, but not their life over it. I genuinely can't think of that. But nope, whenever it's like one of these empires from the Islam world or Turkish world, they just, okay, yeah, we're not gonna fire you. We're gonna unalive you. I'm like, what the?
While Ibrahim Pasha was conquering his way through Morea, Kutahib Pasha assembled an army in Jania and crossed the Pindos Mountains in spring of 1825, arriving before the walls of Missolonghi by April. The town was defended by a garrison of some 3,000 men. It was under the loose overall command of the Swiat captain Notis Botsaris, and composed mostly of Greek and Swiat Albanian warriors, alongside a small contingent of Italian and German Philhellenes. In comparison, Kutahib Pasha had some 20,000 men at his disposal. 8,000 of these were professional soldiers, mostly of Turkish, Muslim Albanian or Bosnian stock, although some wild Cossack mercenaries from the Danube region numbered among them. The rest were labourers and slaves, taken from the local Christian peasantry. Soon the battle was joined, but although Kutaha outnumbered his foe greatly, he would find Missolonghi to be an extremely tough nut to crack. The town was protected by 6,000 feet of thick earthworks,
that's a horrible artwork,
but with
okay.
a large moat and stationed within strategic gun emplacements. By sea it was protected by a shallow lagoon and sandbanks, which made it treacherous for Ottoman warships to directly approach. Indeed, Kutaha's initial attempts to breach the town on both fronts were thwarted. Although Ottoman sappers were able to trigger a massive explosion underneath the earthworks on August 2nd, the following charge to take the ramparts, led by the Cossack mercenaries, was repelled by the Greeks. Meanwhile, attempts by the Ottoman navy to blockade the town by sea also ended in failure when the cowardly Kapitan Pasha, Khusrev, retreated at the sight of Greek fireships, fearing being caught in the shallows and trapped in the inferno. This allowed Missolonghi.
That's not even like. That's a valid fear to have. Whoo! Assassin's Creed. This is literally Assassin's Creed. I was reading the note there. That is literally Assassin's Creed. To make matters worse, defenders have perfected the art of making silent nighttime sorties out the wall, picking out isolated contingents of men in his siege camp, killing them silently with their Yakadin daggers. That's literally Assassin's Creed. I don't know what else. Like, that is 100% Assassin's Creed.
To continue receiving fresh supplies by boat. Despite all this, Kutahib Pasha refused to back down, and since his head was on the line, retreat was simply not an option. However, help was needed, and so Kutaha opened communication with the other invader in the Peloponnese, who thus far had enjoyed far more success against the Greeks. In November of 1825, Ibrahim Pasha's Egyptians arrived at Missolonghi, renewing the naval blockade by sea and bringing in fresh professional infantry and artillery by land. From here, the stubborn town's days were numbered. Within the next few months, the Greek ships resupplying and defending Missolonghi were scattered or sunk by the modern Egyptian fleet, cutting off the town's main lifeline. Still, the defenders refused to surrender, but theirs was a futile struggle.
Yeah.
By March, they had begun to succumb to diseases born of malnutrition, and realized that the walls that protected them were soon to be their tomb. Faced with no other option, Notis Botzaris and the other Hellenic leaders made a plan to break through the Ottoman encirclement and escape, abandoning the city itself, but allowing the men within to live to fight another day.
Alright.
This would amount to a dramatic but ultimately disastrous final charge. On the 10th of April, the defenders burst forth from the town and began carving their way through the Egyptian Ottoman lines, but they were ultimately overrun. The Greeks and Suiots were slaughtered, and the invaders poured into the town, massacring its civilian male population and enslaving the women. For the Hellenic Republic, it was the single...
Dude, I literally, again, I said this in my previous video, and oh my gosh, dude, this is what year is this? Hold on a second. 1821. I went and googled what year is the Great War of Independence. 1821. Bro, again, I said this in my previous video. Bro, I don't see European powers compared to like Turkey or Islamic countries every single time they fight like a war. And this is the insurgency. This is, I mean, it's a war, but still, I'm still gonna use it as an example. Like every single time they like beat someone in battle, they go take slaves. Every single time. Every single time. This in 1821. Sure, slavery was still around for many places at this point, but 1821, slavery was on its way out in places like the British Empire. 1821, people. The transatlantic slave trade was already banned all the way in 1807, and Bray was already planning to remove slavery at this point fully. It was just a slow, gradual process because of the rich elite class that would have been angered had Britain abolished it just completely. Right? I mean, the British has already turned from slavery up, so I don't want to hear nobody in my comments bringing that up, because you can't really bring that up. Even places like, I know Brazil is still hell-bent on slavery, so I'm not even gonna. But Brazil isn't in Europe. Brazil is independent from Portugal up until this point, so Brazil isn't even in Europe. So, but again, I said this in my previous video. Guys, so many European countries was still colonizing at this point, right? What war? I would say the Belgian Congo, but the Belgian Congo, no war was fought or anything. Belgian Congo was Leopold's personal property, so that was Leopold doing that, really and truly. Even then, Leopold was lying. Leopold was that's the thing about all this, is people will bring up like, oh, this European power did slavery, blah, blah, blah. I'm not just trying to defend any European power. Guys, a lot of these European powers, the people who were engaging in slavery were lying about it. So even then, like, a lot of these people in these countries were being deceived by what was actually going on. And this actually originally happened with Britain. When slaves started to argue that Christianity banned slavery, and people needed a reason, or I should say, people who wanted to keep slavery going for money because they're greedy, they used their skin color and basically just gaslit people into thinking that, oh, they were barbaric savages and they were civilizing them and they were doing like the right thing, basically, right? That's why initially nobody in Britain didn't care about slavery. It wasn't until the real details about slavery started to come around that, more and more people were like, yo, what the hell? This is messed up. Same thing with Belgian Congo. Leopold was literally lying his butt off, telling people like, oh yeah, no, it's chill. Like, we all know this. At least I hope we should. People tend to also forget about that. People tend to tend to people tend to think, I should better say, that everybody in Europe knew in perfect detail what was going. No, what I'm saying here is these people here, the Turks and people in the Islamic world, are fighting a war which is going to be reported, and they're taking slaves constantly over and over and over and over. Surely people in these countries, in these Turkic countries, in these Islamic countries, know exactly what is going on. So, and this is modern. This is actually like modern history, and like it's like, again, I don't see European powers engaging in a war that much compared to the Islamic world or Turkic world in this period of time, where they're actively doing this in like every single war. I don't see that much up until this point. And you can quote what I said. Maybe like here and there, but not like every single constant war, not like constantly. Like I never heard of Britain engaging in a war in this period of time, and when they beat their opponents, they enslaved them. Never heard of that in this period of time. Same thing with countries like the Holy Roman Empire, France, Spain and Portugal were the only countries that were doing that. And they're not even most of Europe, right? Sweden, Russia, right? Eventually Italy, when it unified. You don't hear that. Austria, right? And these Europeans were fighting so much wars. But you go look at all these other Islamic countries, all these other Turkic countries that are fighting so much wars. Oh, they won this battle. Oh, they go enslave the residents. I'm like, and they're still actively engaging in it. Actively engaging in it. Like, I'm just saying, I'm just pointing out what I see. Because a lot of people tend to bash Europeans all the time, which sometimes it's necessary, very much necessary. I think Europeans have an annoying superiority complex. I 100% believe so. But when you start unnecessarily bashing them and you start ignoring things about your own country or region, that's what I'm simply pointing it out for you to sit down and think. That's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing. Let's continue.
Single greatest military disaster of the war.
Wix.
To Missolonghi, the Hellenes were hanging on by a thread, but they were hanging on, for a handful of fortresses were still in revolutionary hands, like the provisional capital of Nafplion and the Acropolis at Athens. But the pressure was still on. 3 months after Missolonghi's fall, Kutahu Pasha's army arrived at Athens and dug in for a siege. Ibrahim and his Egyptian land forces, meanwhile, roamed the Morea with impunity, burning villages and carrying off grain and livestock.
This guy is a menace to
However,
society.
the Egyptians had sustained heavy losses over the many battles he had won, rendering them without the manpower to take the remaining Hellenic fortresses. Consequently, the old bandit Kolokotronis continued to be a thorn in Ibrahim's side. Indeed, beyond the plains and in the hills, rebel activity was still strong, and Ibrahim's Arab corps ventured into them at the peril of being picked off by snipers. This inability to take mountainous territory was put on full display in June of 1826, when Ibrahim made the ill-fated decision to lead his armies into the Mani Peninsula. Even before the revolution, Mani had never really been under Ottoman occupation, and when Ibrahim sent an envoy who offered the Maniots death or surrender, the neo...
Bro, I have people explain to me that these guys were like, what, the descendants of Spartans? Oh, I have people explain to me, yeah. You're telling these guys death or surrender.
Spartans sent him back with a reply which would have made their ancestor king Leonidas proud. From the few Greeks of Mani and the rest of the Greeks who lived there to Ibrahim Pasha, We received your letter in which you try to frighten us, saying that if we don't surrender, you'll kill the Maniots and plunder Mani. That's why we are waiting for you and your army. We, the inhabitants of Mani, sign and wait for you." Sure enough, the Egyptians found bitter weeds in Mani. The fortified mountain towns defied him, and at the citadel of Vergas, his 7,000-strong army was repulsed by 2,000 Maniot warriors and 500 assorted refugees from the rest of the Morea. More humiliating on his part was the attempt to pincer Vergas by the Bay of Diros, which had no warrior garrison. There, his soldiers were repulsed by a surprisingly fierce countercharge led by local elders and women, the latter of whom became honorifically known as the Amazons of Diros.
No, bro, no, boss. I mean, yo, this is boss. This is boss. That is awesome. You got women and old people repulsing a whole attack from a professional military. Boss. That is actually badass. I'm not gonna lie. And extremely embarrassing for the Egyptians or Turks, or honestly just for the opposing side. That's embarrassing as hell. Like, that's really embarrassing.
Thwarted once, Ibrahim launched a second invasion in August, but again he was pushed back, this time at the town of Polyaravos, where the Maniots killed 400 Egyptians, losing only 9 men in the process.
Bro. Wow.
The continued struggle of Kolokotronis and the resistance of the Maniots were ultimately small victories compared to the loss of Missolonghi and most of the Peloponnese. However, they were important nonetheless, for they proved that Ibrahim Pasha's Egyptians, who had been virtually undefeated up until this point, were not invincible. Moreover, despite the heavy beating it had received, the revolution was still alive. Although public opinion in Western Europe had always been sympathetic to the Greek cause, the actual governments of those countries were extremely reluctant to get involved, seeing the Hellenic rebels as a threat to the political security of the continent. However, by 1826, factors both internal and external were increasingly pushing the great colonial powers of Europe toward direct military intervention on the Greeks' behalf. By that point, public outcry against the slaughter of the Christians of Greece by Islamic soldiers was becoming too hard to ignore. This sentiment had snowballed after Western Philhellenes, like Lord Byron, began martyring themselves fighting for the Greek cause, and continued to do so after Missolonghi, as an unprecedented outpouring of sympathy from the romantic, educated masses of Enlightenment Europe grew into a force which governments could not ignore. Throughout the West, lobbyist societies began popping up to support the Greek cause, such as the Société Philanthropique en Faveur des Grecs in.
I find it funny how when it's something like Western, right? When it's like a Western country that have like legal bribing, essentially legal corruption, they'll say, oh, it's just lobbying parties. Lobbying is literally just legal bribing. It's just legal corruption. But if it's a country like Russia or something, they'll say, corrupted Russian oligarchs and their influence is so horrendous. Oh, I should have used my voice changer there. I don't know if you guys realize that I had a voice changer. if you really paid attention to my videos, you know that I have a voice changer. But yeah, I have a voice changer because I have a mixer. But I really find that double standards to be very interesting. Oh, lobbyists, just say oligarch, kings and generals. Okay, like
France, which was patronized by the powerful Duke of Orleans. Concurrently, painters, composers, and playwrights utilized their voices to engender sympathy for the Greek cause. All over Europe, Philhellenism became a cultural phenomenon which unified diverse swaths of European society, a factor which eventually helped push their governments to action. As Britain and France inched ever closer to sending armies into Greece, individual Briton adventurers continued to go off to fight of their own accord. But no longer were these Philhellenes young students or romantic lordlings, but high-ranking decorated war heroes. Indeed, after Ibrahim's devastating military invasion, Greek leadership was in disarray, and as such, the struggling republic consented to allow members of the British military aristocracy to lead the Hellenic army and navy. Back in 1825, the London Greek Committee, the foremost Philhellene lobbyists in England, secured the private services of one Lord Thomas Cochrane. Longtime viewers of our
Thomas Cochrane, Giga Chad,
will be intimately familiar with Lord Cochrane and his antics, a Scottish madman who was perhaps the single deadliest sea captain of the 19th century.
I love this guy, man. Oh my goodness, man. Amazing. This guy. I don't know if you guys know who this guy is. This guy is legendary. I'm not like one of those people who claim to be this, that, and the next. Well, that's not true. I'll usually say that I'm like Scottish, but I'm not like one of those. I don't really like fully claim to be like one thing. As well, I say that I'm just English, but my surname is still Scottish. I still have Scottish lineage inside me. Something very common in the Caribbean, really and truly. It's actually just the fact that the original slaves for a lot of these Caribbean islands were actually white Scottish people or Irish people. That's actually why. That's why. At least my country. I know Jamaica too has a bunch of Scottish influence, but they have like other outside influence as well that influence their accent. But in the case of Barbados, that's usually why you'd hear them sound. They sound like Barbadians sound British, but they sound more Scottish. Most people never really heard a Barbadian speak, except for myself. And even then, I'm not really like trying to talk out my full accent. Like, if you've been paying attention to my videos, you'll hear my accent just fluctuate left, right, and center. Like earlier when I was reading, like my Scottish accent was more coming out there, and then it just completely toned back down. But if you do hear Barbadian speak, or if you just go to a video, or you just Google like Barbados or like Bridgetown Barbados tour, because some people just do that. Some people just take a camera, walk around like the city in Barbados or the island, because it's kind of a small island. You could do that, and they just talk. If you listen to their accent, it's like, yeah, they sound British, but they don't sound like English British. You know what I mean? They sound like Scottish, and that's not a coincidence, because the Scottish indentured servants, which were basically just slaves, they were working in the exact plantations that the Africans would come to work in. So they were literally working side by side. And when the Africans had to learn English, well, those Scottish slaves had to teach them how to speak English. And obviously, due to the fact that Barbados originally anyways was a settlement colony, most of the settlers were indeed from Scotland or Ireland. So overall, it's just like, you know, the Scottish influence is just very heavy, especially with the accent and whatnot. So, you know, that's why today Barbados sounds extremely Scottish. I mean, we know about this. They teach us this in school like all the time. But most people don't know that. Barbados knows very much of its Scottish heritage as well. So I'm not gonna get some comments talking about some but you're black. You can literally just Google black Scottish people and you can read a Wikipedia article about them. It'll say big and bold, they exist in the Caribbean. So race does not equal ethnicity.
having made mincemeat of France's warships during the Napoleonic Wars, only to run afoul of the British government and then go into exile in South America, where he played a critical role in helping Chile, Peru and Brazil win their respective independence wars. As Cochrane was sent to lead the Greeks by sea, so too was his counterpart, Richard Church, appointed to lead them by land. Church was an Irishman with roots in the Greek community. During the Napoleonic Wars, he had led an auxiliary regiment of the British Army, composed of ethnic Greek light infantry, to take the French-occupied Ionian Islands. Serving in Church's Greek regiment during this time was a younger Theodoros Kolokotronis. Indeed, the old warlord had great respect for his former British commander, and when Church arrived to command the Greek army, Kolokotronis is said to have remarked, "At long last, our father is come." The two Britons immediately had a unifying impact on the Greek war effort.
Kings and generals, I love you. I love you. I love you for what you just said. I love you. 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 He didn't say British. He said Briton. Oh my gosh. I love you for that. That will probably go over most people's heads. But why is that such a big deal? Because a lot of people tend to not understand what a Briton is. A Briton is simply a person that is indigenous to Britannia. And who was indigenous to Britannia? Scottish people and Irish people. Not English people who came from Germania. Okay? English people, I know this is going to make a lot of English people mad, but I don't care. English people usurped that term from the actual Britons. And that's annoying whenever I hear an English person say, "I'm a Briton." No, you're not. I'm not a Briton. I'm not a Briton. Okay? British and Briton are not the same word. Okay? British is the political term. It's the political cultural term. Briton is the native indigenous word. Okay? It's like saying Native American and American are one and the same. Because I see some people are like, "Oh, well, you could still use it to mean like the same." Like, no. Like, imagine I go to a Native American being like, "Oh, what's up?" Or no. Imagine go to an American who's not Native American and I say, "Oh, you're Native American." Like, that's not gonna sound right. It's the same logic. Same logic there, man. Freaking hell. I'm not a Briton because I'm not from freaking Britannia. I'm not from Britannia. Even though I have some Celtic, but I'm not even pure. I'm not predominantly white, even though I'm a good chunk. There's a good chunk of white in me, at least 20% minimum, probably more than that, really and truly, because my father's half white and my mother is mostly Afro-Indian descent, but she also still has white in her too, because her last name is French. And I explained this before, my France reaction, but back then, when you got married to a European in the Caribbean, you had to take their surname. So her name was, French, her last name anyway. So no, she has white in her blood too, but just not as much as my father. So no, I'm at least a good minimum 20%, but still, it's like, no, I would never call myself a Briton. That for sure. I am not a Briton. Nope.
After Ibrahim's campaign of destruction, the Hellenic government had fallen back into their old rivalries. Mavrocordatos, the old ship of state, had gone into retirement after the fall of Missolonghi, and in his absence, the National Assembly he built, then fought a civil war to unify, had split again into two rival factions of bickering politicians and warlords, based
Greece. Seriously, Greece, you should not be doing this right now.
in Aegina and Castri, respectively. When Church and Cochrane landed on Greek soil in March of 1827, they both refused to accept office until the squabbling factions settled their differences, which they eventually did. With the Greeks now about as unified as they were capable of being.
Bro, why didn't the Ottomans take advantage of this?
Took their respective positions as admiral and commander-in-chief of the Hellenic Republic and went on the offensive. Their first mission was to relieve the Acropolis at Athens, which for nearly a year had been under siege by Katahu Pasha's forces. This, however, would not go as planned. Ironically, while Cochrane and Church were capable of unifying the Greek factions, they could not stand one another and were constantly butting heads. Their utter inability to coordinate or cooperate led to Katahu leading a successful sortie against Cochrane's advance force, which killed over 1,500 Greek soldiers. Seeing their relief army annihilated, the small garrison holding out in the Acropolis surrendered, and Athens fell back into Ottoman hands.
Wow.
It was yet another heavy setback for the Greek cause. But this was still not the end, for on the great stage on which the concert of Europe...
Cochrane, what is going on? I'm disappointed.
The gears of geopolitics had begun to turn. Where Britain's best military minds had failed the Greeks, their politicians would succeed. As much as the eventual intervention of the great powers in the Greek War of Independence was influenced by public sympathy, the core deciding factor was born of realpolitik. By the 1820s, there was a Russian-sized elephant in the room. The Tsar's influence in Ottoman affairs had been increasing since the 1770s, and as Western Europe watched Istanbul's territory gradually shrink at St. Petersburg's expense, an Eastern question arose. What would happen to the balance of power in Europe if the Ottoman Empire collapsed and Russia doubled its territory?
I think kings and generals meant to say, because he said at St. Petersburg expense, I think he meant to say at St. Petersburg gain, because him saying expense is saying that is detrimental, like it's hurting St. Petersburg. I think he said that wrong. Just pointing that out.
Fears of Russian expansionism had been one of the reasons Western Europe operated on a strict policy of non-intervention when the Greeks initially revolted, for they hoped that if the Sultan crushed the rebellion quickly, then Russia would not take advantage of the chaos to gain more land at the Ottomans' expense. However, the rebellion was now in year 5, and every extra day it fought on increased Western fears that Russia would finally involve themselves, fears which were exacerbated when the geopolitically conservative Tsar Alexander I died in 1825 and was replaced by his much more ambitious brother Nicholas I, who immediately started putting the screws on Sultan Mahmud, forcing him to sign the Convention of Akerman in October of 1826, which greatly increased Russian influence over the Ottoman-controlled Romanian principalities. This put the powers that be in Western Europe into political overdrive as they scrambled to ensure that Greece would not ultimately become a Russian-dominated satellite, as all Ottoman territories in Europe seemed on trajectory to be. Thus, Britain launched itself into Greek affairs on the...
Again, guys, I made a video where I reacted to how Russia, like why Russia is poor. Go watch that video. And this is exactly what I was speaking about here. This is one of the reasons why I brought up here, right? Like Europe has been so terrified of Russia that it has done any and everything to stop Russia from gaining and progressing, right? And this is, again, perfect example of that. Just pointing that out, right? Because I had so many people on that video call me crazy and blah, blah, blah. I didn't really care. I still knew that I was right regardless. I mean, Honestly, bro, I'm gonna be so real right now. I mean, like, I'm aware that, you know, most people are casuals and neurotypical people. So, you know, they just, you know, their face value, very surface level, can't really think beneath the surface. Most of y'all are like that. Most of y'all are like that. Trust me. Most of y'all are like that. Most of y'all watching me are like that. I'm not even kidding. Not even kidding. And if you're sitting here thinking to yourself, oh, well, that's not me, it's probably you. So,
subtext of containing Russia, and the pretext of stopping the still at large Ibrahim Pasha from carrying out an alleged barbarization project in which he supposedly intended to enslave and deport the Peloponnese's entire Christian population and replace them with Egyptian farmers. As it turned out, Britain and Russia would not have to butt heads with Greece.
That's interesting. There's still historians are still debating. If historians are still debating on that, I can't really comment on that really and truly.
Largely due to the efforts of Foreign Secretary George Canning, the two superpowers came to an agreement in which, for the sake of global stability, they would jointly mediate the ongoing conflict between the Hellenes and the Sultan. France, meanwhile, had been initially reluctant, but soon also joined in on the negotiations. The ultimate result was the Treaty of London, signed on July 6, 1827. In it, the three greatest powers in Europe finally declared their official support for the Greek cause, sponsoring the creation of an internally autonomous Hellenic state, albeit one that would still pay tribute to and recognize as overlord the Sultan in Istanbul. The Treaty of London was engineered to be a conciliatory resolution for all parties involved. The Greeks would get their independence, albeit in a limited capacity, while the Ottomans would nominally maintain their territorial integrity. The Russians, who, per the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca, were the nominal protectors of all Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire, would still be able to sink their claws of influence into this new Greek nation. Meanwhile, the British and French had seemingly solved their Eastern question by preventing the Ottomans' collapse and containing Russian expansion, all while appeasing their ravenous Philhellene citizenry by aiding the Christian Greeks. There was only one problem. The Ottoman Sultan completely rejected the terms. The bluff had been called, and the powers of Europe would now either have to drop the matter or enforce their demands by might. They chose the latter, and so it was that in the summer of 1827, a joint Anglo-French and Russian fleet, composed of the finest warships in the world, sailed for the Ionian Sea. The Greek War of Independence was about to become an international war.
My brother in Christ, this reminds me of the freaking Crimean War. This reminds me of the Crimean War. What the hell? What the heck, bro? Wait. Wouldn't like... Bro! Hold on a second. I remember Pax Britannica when I reacted to Napoleonic Wars, right? It was Epic History TV. I remember now. Epic History TV said that, oh, after the Napoleonic Wars and Pax Britannica happened, that there was no like major like wars between like the major powers of Europe up until like 100 years, up until World War One. Bro, what is this? Like, this seems like a major war now. Oh my goodness, bro.
In our next and final episode on the Greek War of Independence, we will cover the decisive naval battle of Navarino, so make sure you are subscribed.
It's just one battle. Wow. Anyway, look, man, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, you like what I have to say, make sure you go like, comment, subscribe. If you've got any suggestions for me, go tell me in the comments down below. Eventually, I will do it. Well, go check out my other reactions on this series and my other reactions, a whole bunch of other stuff and whatnot. I just find it mad, like, how the British and the Russians were literally fighting together in this conflict, and they will eventually come to fight each other. That's whatever. Anyways, thank you for watching, and goodbye.